She was just a cashier in a simple gray cardigan, standing quietly behind the polished chrome counter of the world's most exclusive toy store, Innovate, Play. They saw her unassuming posture, her plain clothes, and the serene, almost distant look in her eyes, and they judged her instantly. A trio of arrogant tech investors, dripping with designer labels and loud confidence, decided to make her the object of their afternoon's amusement. They challenged her, the quiet cashier, to solve a Rubik's Cube. Placing a brightly colored puzzle on the counter with a sneering dare, they thought she was beneath them, a simple cog in a machine they could buy and sell. They had no idea they were mocking a legend. What happened next would not just shatter their arrogance, it would change everything. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. Her name was Maya, and the quiet life she had cultivated within the gleaming walls of Innovate Play was a deliberate choice, a sanctuary from a world that had tried to define her by a single, extraordinary talent. For 6 months, she had found a strange peace in the rhythmic beeping of the scanner, the polite murmur of customer inquiries, and the simple, tangible act of placing a beautifully crafted toy into a bag. It was a world away from the roaring crowds, the blinding flash of cameras, and the relentless pressure of the competitive circuit. Here she was not Mystic Maya, the 3-time reigning world speed cubing champion, the woman whose hands moved faster than the eye could follow. Here she was just Maya, a quiet woman in a comfortable cardigan, and that anonymity was a treasure she guarded fiercely. She was writing a book, a memoir, not about the wins and the records, but about the psychology of focus and the quiet meditative state she entered when the world fell away and only the puzzle remained. To do that, she needed to observe the world from a place of stillness, to understand the rhythms of everyday life she had missed while traveling from one championship to another. The toy store, with its constant flow of families, children, and, unfortunately, people like Julian, was the perfect research ground. Julian was the store manager, a man who wore his tailored suit like a suit of armor, and his condescension like a signature tie. He saw the world as a hierarchy, and he was determined to be at its apex. He judged every person who walked through the door in a matter of seconds, his eyes flicking over their shoes, their watch, their handbag, calculating their worth and their right to breathe the store's rarefied air. From her first day, he had pegged Maya as a nobody. He couldn't comprehend why Mr. Harrison, the enigmatic owner of the entire Innovate Play global franchise, had personally recommended her for the job. Julian had made his displeasure known through 1,000 tiny humiliations, assigning her to the most tedious tasks, speaking to her in a patronizingly slow voice, and constantly reminding her of the caliber of their clientele. He was a gatekeeper, and in his small kingdom of expensive toys, he was absolute. Maya, however, remained serene, a placid lake reflecting his agitated arrogance back at him. She observed his behavior, cataloging it for her research, finding his predictability almost pitiable. Her calm dignity only infuriated him further. He couldn't understand her lack of reaction, her refusal to be intimidated. It was as if she were operating on a different plane of existence, one his superficial judgments couldn't touch, and in a way she was. She was a master of a universe of permutations and algorithms, so complex it would make his head spin. A world where the only thing that mattered was the elegant, logical path to a perfect solution. He saw a simple cashier, she saw a flawed puzzle she was in no hurry to solve. Her peaceful observation was about to be shattered. There was a young man, Liam, a new stockroom assistant who had started a month after Maya. He was a student, earnest and kind, with a perpetually worried expression as if he were constantly afraid of doing something wrong. Unlike Julian, Liam saw Maya. He saw the way she patiently explained a complex building set to a frustrated child, the gentle smile she offered an overwhelmed parent, and the quiet efficiency with which she managed her counter during the busiest rushes. He often found excuses to come to the front of the store, just to exchange a few words with her. He'd ask her about her day, share a funny story about a misplaced shipment of robotic dogs, or simply offer her a cup of tea he'd brewed in the staff room. He was a small beacon of normalcy and kindness in an environment that was often stiff and judgmental. Liam was deeply intimidated by Julian. The manager's sharp rebukes and sneering comments made him flinch, and he tried to stay out of his direct line of sight as much as possible. Yet, he couldn't help but notice the particular disdain Julian reserved for Maya. He saw the eye rolls, heard the condescending tone, and it made him deeply uncomfortable. He wanted to say something, to defend her, but the fear of losing a much-needed job kept him silent. His inaction was a source of private shame for him, a small, bitter pill he swallowed every time Julian walked past Maya's counter with a smug little sniff of disapproval. On this particular afternoon, a Tuesday that had been blessedly quiet, Liam was organizing a display of intricate German-made wooden castles near the front entrance. He was meticulously arranging the tiny flags on the turrets when the bell above the door chimed, announcing the arrival of what Julian would call the right kind of customers. 3 men, loud and boisterous, strode in as if they owned the place. They were draped in the casual but obnoxiously expensive attire of tech entrepreneurs, limited-edition sneakers, hoodies from obscure luxury brands, and watches that cost more than Liam's tuition. Their voices echoed in the serene space, filled with jargon about Series B, funding, user acquisition, and disruptive technologies. Julian, who had been lurking near the back office, materialized instantly. His posture straightened, a practiced, sycophantic smile plastered on his face. He glided towards them, his hands clasped, a portrait of fawning servitude. "Gentlemen, welcome, welcome! A pleasure to have you back!" he purred, his voice dripping with a sweetness he never used with his staff. Liam watched the scene unfold, a familiar sense of dread coiling in his stomach. He knew this trio. They came in every few weeks, not to buy anything for children, but to acquire the latest executive desk toys and gadgets, items they treated as trophies of their intellectual superiority. And every visit, they left a wake of casual arrogance, treating the store like their personal clubhouse and its employees like invisible servants. Today, their eyes, hungry for amusement, scanned the store and landed on Maya, standing quietly at her post, her hands resting calmly on the counter. A cruel spark of an idea lit up the face of the group's apparent leader. A man named Bryce. He nudged his friends, a smirk spreading across his face. "Hey, Julian!" he called out, his voice loud enough for the entire store to hear. "Thinking of getting a little something to test the interns. A brain teaser. You know, to separate the wheat from the chaff." He picked up a classic 3x3 Rubik's Cube from a display, tossing it lightly in his hand. "Something simple. Like this." He then turned his gaze directly to Maya, a predator singling out its prey. "Tell you what," he said, his voice laced with patronizing amusement. "Let's see if your cashier can even figure out which way to turn it. A little test. For fun." The other two snickered, and Julian, desperate to please, joined in with a nervous, high-pitched laugh. Liam's heart sank. He looked at Maya, her face a mask of calm neutrality, and felt a hot surge of anger and shame. He knew he should step forward, say something, anything. But his feet felt like lead, his voice trapped in his throat. The humiliation was about to begin, and he was just a helpless witness. Julian's smile widened, seeing an opportunity to curry favor with his VIP clients, while simultaneously putting Maya in her place, a place he felt was far beneath the polished floors of his establishment. "An excellent idea, Mr. Henderson," Julian said to Bryce, his tone oily and conspiratorial. "A live demonstration of basic problem-solving skills, or the lack thereof." He took the cube from Bryce and walked it over to the counter, placing it down with a theatrical thud. He leaned in close to Maya, his voice a low, menacing whisper meant only for her, though Liam could read the malice in his posture from across the room. "Don't embarrass the store," he hissed, his breath smelling of stale coffee and self-importance. "Just look confused, pretend to try, and we'll all have a good laugh. Understand? Play the part." Maya didn't look at him. Her gaze remained fixed on the cube, a perfect constellation of jumbled colors. The vibrant chaos of the puzzle seemed to draw her in, a familiar language in a room full of noise. She gave a slow, deliberate blink, the only acknowledgement that she had heard him at all. This lack of visible fear or anxiety seemed to irk Julian even more. He straightened his signature tie, a nervous tick he displayed when asserting his authority, and turned back to the investors. "Now, miss," he said, his voice booming with false magnanimity, "our esteemed guests have presented a little challenge, a simple puzzle. Do you think you can handle it?" The question hung in the air, thick with condescension. Bryce and his companions chuckled, crossing their arms as they prepared for the show. They saw a woman who was clearly out of her depth, a prop for their afternoon's entertainment. Maya finally lifted her eyes from the cube and looked at the men. She didn't look angry or intimidated. She looked analytical. Her gaze was calm and steady, and she held it for a moment longer than was comfortable, a silent act of defiance that went unnoticed by the arrogant men but was deeply felt by Liam, who watched, frozen, from behind a display of robotic pets. "I am prepared to attempt a solution," Maya said, her voice even and clear, devoid of any emotion. It was a simple, direct statement of fact, but in the charged atmosphere, it sounded like a quiet thunderclap. Her refusal to play the flustered, simple-minded cashier they expected was a small tear in the fabric of their script. Bryce raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh, she's prepared to attempt a solution," he mocked, turning to his friends. "Hear that, guys? We've got a real go-getter here." The three of them laughed again, a braying, unpleasant sound that grated on Liam's nerves. Julian, seeing his script being ignored, grew visibly agitated. He gestured impatiently at the cube. "Well, go on then," he snapped at Maya. "Our guests are waiting. Don't take all day about it." The public humiliation was now in full swing, a carefully orchestrated performance with Maya as the unwilling star. They had set the stage, defined her role, and were now waiting for her to stumble. Liam felt a knot of helplessness tighten in his gut. He wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He looked at Maya's hands, resting beside the cube, and saw no tremor, no sign of fear. Just a profound stillness, the calm before a storm they could never have predicted. The pressure in the room was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket of smug expectation. Bryce, the ringleader, leaned against a display of high-tech drones, his arms crossed, a sneer playing on his lips. "You know," he began, directing his words to his friends but making sure Maya could hear every syllable. "It's funny. We spend our days developing algorithms to solve some of the world's most complex data problems, and here we are, stumped by whether a cashier can solve a child's toy from the 1980s. It really puts things in perspective." His friends chortled in agreement. The second investor, a lanky man named Evan, chimed in. "Be nice, Bryce. Maybe she's got hidden talents. Maybe she can make a really good latte or something." The third, Kevin, simply shook his head, looking at Maya with a mixture of pity and contempt. "This is just cruel, man," he said, though his grin suggested he was enjoying every moment. Julian, ever the attentive host to his clients' egos, added his own layer of condescension. Now, gentlemen," he said, wagging a finger playfully, "let's not be too harsh. Everyone has their own skill set. Operating a point-of-sale system requires a great deal of focus, after all." He looked at Maya and gave her a tight, false smile. "Isn't that right?" Maya ignored him. Her focus was entirely on the cube now. She reached out, not with the frantic, unsure movements they expected, but with a slow, deliberate grace. She picked it up, feeling its familiar weight in her palms. She held it as if it were a delicate instrument, her fingertips finding their natural positions on the plastic faces. The room fell silent for a beat. The men's mocking chatter momentarily paused as they watched her. Liam, from his hiding spot, held his breath. He saw the shift in her posture, a subtle alignment of her spine, a focus in her eyes that was so intense it seemed to suck the very air around her. For a fleeting second, she was no longer a cashier. She was something else entirely. She began to turn the cube, slowly at first. A deliberate turn of the top face, a smooth rotation of the right, a flick of the front. Each movement was precise, economical, and perfectly silent, save for the soft, satisfying click of the internal mechanism. The investors, who had expected her to fumble and stare blankly at the colors, now watched with a flicker of confusion. This wasn't the performance of an amateur. This was methodical. Bryce's smirk faltered slightly. Okay, she knows how to turn it. Impressive, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm to mask his surprise. At this rate, we might get a solution by closing time. Julian forced a laugh, but it was strained. He too could see the unexpected competence in Maya's hands. He stepped closer to the counter, his brow furrowed. Just a bit of luck, I'm sure, he muttered under his breath, trying to reassure himself as much as his clients. She's probably just making a pattern. But Maya wasn't making a pattern, she was inspecting. With each slow turn, she was absorbing the cube's state. Her mind a supercomputer processing billions of possibilities. Charting a course through a sea of permutations. Her eyes were slightly unfocused, looking through the plastic and into the abstract mathematical heart of the puzzle. It took her precisely 10 seconds. 10 seconds of slow, deliberate turns, during which the atmosphere in the store shifted from mocking amusement to a tense, uncertain curiosity. The men fell completely silent, their arrogant postures stiffening as they watched her hands. Liam felt a single drop of sweat trickle down his temple. After her inspection was complete, Maya placed the cube back on the counter. She took a single, deep, steadying breath, her shoulders rising and falling in a slow, controlled motion. She looked up and met Bryce's eyes directly. Her expression was unreadable, a perfect poker face. "Are you ready?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a knife. Bryce was taken aback by the question. "Ready for what?" he stammered, his bravado momentarily deserting him. Maya simply nodded once, a gesture of finality, and placed her hands back on the cube. The humiliation phase was over. Something else was about to begin. The world seemed to contract around the small space on the counter where the Rubik's Cube sat. The ambient store music, a soft, generic electronic melody, faded into an indistinct hum. The ticking of the large, minimalist clock on the wall became a slow, heavy metronome, marking the seconds before an unknown event. Maya's question, "Are you ready?" still hung in the air, an unexpected challenge that had completely upended the power dynamic. Bryce, Evan, and Kevin exchanged uneasy glances. The script had been flipped. They were no longer the ones in control of this situation. They were now the audience, waiting for a performance they hadn't anticipated. Julian, standing beside them, wrung his hands, his face a mask of anxious confusion. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to order Maya to stop this foolishness, but no sound came out. He was transfixed, like everyone else, by the intense, almost spiritual focus radiating from the woman in the gray cardigan. Liam, peering from between a gap in a toy display, felt his heart hammering against his ribs. He was no longer just embarrassed or angry. He was gripped by a thrilling, terrifying sense of anticipation. He didn't know what was about to happen, but he knew with an unshakable certainty that it would be extraordinary. Maya's hands hovered over the cube for a fraction of a second. Her fingers poised like a concert pianist about to begin a symphony. And then, they moved. It was not a movement in the normal sense of the word. It was an explosion of motion. A blur of flesh and color that defied comprehension. The soft clicking of the cube from moments before was gone, replaced by a sound that was utterly alien in the quiet toy store. It was a high-pitched, continuous, whirring, shredding sound. The sound of plastic moving at the absolute limit of its physical tolerance. Her hands were a whirlwind. Her fingers, which had seemed so calm and gentle, were now a blur, executing algorithms with a speed and precision that seemed impossible. The colors of the cube faces didn't just change, they flowed, melting into one another in a cascade of reds, blues, greens, yellows, oranges, and whites. It was a fluid, violent, and beautiful spectacle. The faces of the three investors were comical studies in disbelief. Their jaws literally dropped. Their eyes, wide and unblinking, struggled to track the motion but failed completely. It was like trying to read the label on a spinning top. Bryce took an involuntary step back, bumping into a display of board games and sending a few boxes tumbling to the floor with a soft thud that no one noticed. Evan's hand went to his mouth, his mind, accustomed to the logical, predictable world of code and spreadsheets, unable to process the sensory data it was receiving. Kevin just stared, his face pale, as if he had just witnessed an act of magic. Julian was even worse. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, grayish pallor. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish out of water. His entire worldview, a carefully constructed edifice built on superficial judgments of wealth and status, was being demolished in real time by the cashier he had dismissed as a simpleton. He looked at her hands, then at her serene, focused face, and a dawning horror began to creep into his eyes. This was not a party trick, this was not luck, this was mastery, this was genius. The sound stopped as abruptly as it had begun. In the deafening silence that followed, Maya's hands came to a sudden, perfect rest on either side of the cube. She lifted them slowly, revealing the object on the counter. It was perfect. 6 solid faces, 6 perfect colors, solved. She took another slow breath and looked up, her calm gaze sweeping over the 3 stunned investors and their terrified manager. The entire event, from the moment her hands had blurred into motion to the final, stunning reveal, had taken less than 5 seconds. A world-class time. And she had done it without breaking a sweat, without the slightest hint of exertion. She had done it as easily as breathing. The humiliation had been turned back on its creators with a force they could never have imagined. The silence that followed the cube's solution was an entity in itself. It was dense, heavy, and filled with the unspoken shock of the 5 men who had just witnessed the impossible. The soft electronic music of the store seemed to creep back into the vacuum, sounding tinny and absurd. The world outside the store's large glass windows, with its passing cars and pedestrians, felt a million miles away. Inside, time had stopped. Bryce, Evan, and Kevin remained frozen, their minds still trying to reconcile the image of the quiet cashier with the blur of motion they had just seen. The solved cube sat on the counter, a vibrant, perfect monument to their own staggering ignorance. Julian was the first to break the spell, letting out a small, strangled gasp. The sound was pathetic, the squeak of a cornered animal. His eyes darted from Maya's calm face to the cube, and then to the faces of his prized clients, searching for some explanation, some way to salvage the situation. But there was nothing. Their expressions were blank slates wiped clean of all their previous arrogance. Liam, emboldened by the sudden shift in power, finally stepped out from behind his display. He didn't say a word, but his presence was a statement. He walked slowly towards the counter, his eyes shining with a mixture of awe and vindication, and stood a respectful distance away from Maya, a silent, supportive ally. It was Maya who finally spoke, her voice retaining its unwavering calm. "The puzzle is complete," she said, the simple statement landing with the force of a final judgment. Her words seemed to stir Bryce from his stupor. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked at Maya, truly looked at her for the first time, and saw not a service worker, but a figure of immense and inexplicable power. The sneer was gone, replaced by a dawning, fearful respect. "How?" he started, his voice a hoarse whisper. "How did you do that?" Before Maya could answer, the chime above the store's main entrance rang out, sharp and clear. A man stepped inside, bringing with him an aura of quiet authority that instantly commanded the attention of the entire room. He was in his late 50s, with silvering hair and a kind, intelligent face. He was dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored sports coat and trousers. He was not flashy, but his presence filled the space with a palpable sense of importance. Julian's head whipped around, and his face, already pale, turned a ghostly shade of white. His eyes widened in sheer terror. He recognized the man instantly. It was Mr. Harrison, the founder and owner of the entire global Innovate play empire. Mr. Harrison's visits were the stuff of legend. They were always unannounced, always thorough, and they could make or break a manager's career. And he had just walked in on a scene of utter chaos and humiliation, with his top manager standing slack-jawed and terrified. Mr. Harrison's keen eyes took in the scene in a single sweeping glance. The 3 disheveled, looking investors, the fallen board games on the floor, his trembling, ashen-faced store manager, the young stockboy standing at attention, and Maya, standing behind the counter with a solved Rubik's Cube before her. looking as serene as a calm sea. He paused, his gaze resting on Maya, and a slow, warm smile spread across his face. He walked forward, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor, ignoring everyone else. He stopped directly in front of the counter and looked at Maya with genuine affection and respect. "Maya," he said, his voice warm and rich, "I was hoping I might find you here. I see you're keeping your skills sharp." The vindicator had arrived. The moment Mr. Harrison spoke her name with such familiar warmth, the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place for everyone in the room. The sight of the legendary owner of Innovate Play, not only knowing the quiet cashier but speaking to her as an equal, a friend, sent a shockwave through the stunned onlookers. Julian felt a tremor run through his entire body. It was as if the floor had dissolved beneath his feet, plunging him into a bottomless abyss of his own making. His mind raced, frantically replaying every condescending word, every dismissive gesture he had ever directed at Maya. He had not just mistreated an employee, he had insulted someone personally known and respected by the one man who held his entire career in the palm of his hand. The realization was so catastrophic that he felt a wave of nausea wash over him. Bryce, Evan, and Kevin stared, their mouths agape. Their world, which was so neatly ordered by wealth and perceived status, had been turned completely upside down. The woman they had mocked, the woman they had treated as an object for their amusement, was clearly someone of immense importance. The speed cubing display was no longer just a shocking party trick. It was a clue to a much larger reality they had been too arrogant to see. They felt a deep, chilling shame, the kind that comes from being exposed not just as cruel, but as utterly foolish. Liam, on the other hand, felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. A wide grin spread across his face as he watched the scene unfold. It was better than anything he could have imagined. Maya's quiet dignity, her incredible skill, and now this final, stunning revelation, it was a perfect karmic resolution. Maya offered Mr. Harrison a small, genuine smile. "Arthur," she replied, her tone respectful but familiar. "It's good to see you. I was just demonstrating one of your company's classic products." Her gaze flickered briefly towards the three investors, a subtle but unmistakable glint in her eyes. Mr. Harrison's smile tightened slightly as he finally turned his attention to the rest of the room. His kindly demeanor vanished, replaced by the sharp analytical gaze of a man who had built a billion-dollar empire from the ground up. He looked at the three investors, his eyes lingering for a moment on their expensive, disheveled clothing and their stunned faces. Then his gaze fell upon Julian. Julian flinched as if he had been physically struck. He tried to speak, to form some kind of explanation or apology, but his throat was tight with panic. Mr. Harrison, sir," he stammered, his voice cracking. This is not what it looks like. We were just having a bit of fun." Mr. Harrison raised a hand, and Julian fell silent instantly. The owner's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet, but it carried an edge of cold steel that cut through the room. "Fun, Julian?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "It looked to me like you and your guests were publicly harassing one of my employees." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "And not just any employee." He turned back to the investors, who now looked like chastened schoolboys caught in a lie. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "do you have any idea who this is?" He gestured towards Maya. Bryce and his friends could only shake their heads numbly. Mr. Harrison let the silence stretch for a moment before delivering the final blow. "This," he announced, his voice ringing with pride, "is Maya Vance. She is the 3-time world speed cubing champion. She is the author of the upcoming book, The Center of the Cube, which my company is sponsoring. And she is one of the most brilliant minds I have ever had the pleasure of knowing." The revelation landed like a thunderbolt, leaving no room for doubt or misinterpretation. They had not just challenged a cashier to solve a puzzle. They had challenged the best in the world. They had mocked a genius. And they had done it in front of her powerful, influential friend. The comeuppance was just beginning. The weight of Mr. Harrison's words seemed to physically alter the atmosphere in the store. The air grew heavy, charged with the devastating finality of the truth. Maya Vance, world champion. Author. The name, the titles, echoed in the minds of Julian and the three investors, each syllable a hammer blow against their crumbling egos. They had not just made a mistake, they had committed a cardinal sin in their world of networking and influence. They had profoundly misjudged someone's importance, and in doing so, had revealed their own superficiality to a man who could blacklist them with a single phone call. Julian's face was now a tragic mask of utter despair. His tailored suit, once a symbol of his authority, now seemed like a ridiculous costume. He stared at Maya, at the woman he had belittled for 6 months, and saw her for the first time. A titan of her field. A powerhouse of intellect and skill, who had chosen to walk in his little kingdom for her own inscrutable reasons. He saw the countless opportunities he'd had to show her basic human decency and kindness, and how he had squandered every single one in favor of petty displays of power. The shame was so overwhelming it was almost a physical pain. He felt his knees weaken and had to subtly brace himself against a display case to keep from stumbling. His career at Innovate Play was over. He knew that with a sickening certainty, but the greater loss was the sudden, crushing understanding of his own character's bankruptcy. Bryce, Evan, and Kevin were in a similar state of shock, but theirs was laced with a more practical, desperate fear. As venture capitalists and tech entrepreneurs, their reputation was everything. They had built their careers on being able to identify talent and potential, on being the smartest guys in the room. In the span of 5 seconds, Maya had proven they were blind, and in the span of 1 minute, Mr. Harrison had shown them the catastrophic consequences of that blindness. Mr. Harrison, or Arthur Vance as Maya knew him, was not just a toy magnate. He was a significant investor in the tech world, a kingmaker with deep connections. They had just made themselves look like fools in front of him. Their minds reeled with the potential fallout. Lost deals, damaged reputations, the sneering gossip that would ripple through their circles. They had walked into the store as predators and were now exposed as clowns. Mr. Harrison turned his cold, disappointed gaze back to his store manager. "Julian," he began, his voice low and measured, "I entrusted you with the flagship store of my company. I entrusted you with my brand's reputation for innovation, intelligence, and, above all, respect. You have failed on all counts." He gestured around the store. "This is not a playground for the egos of your wealthy friends. It is a place for discovery and joy. You have fostered an environment that is toxic, exclusionary, and frankly, stupid." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word was a carefully aimed dart, finding its mark in Julian's dissolving confidence. "You publicly humiliated an employee who is, without question, the most brilliant person to ever grace this store, myself included. You judged her by her clothes, not her character. You valued the superficial swagger of these men." He gave the trio a look of profound disgust. "Over the quiet dignity of your own staff. That is not a leadership error, Julian. That is a failure of character." He took a deep breath, the decision already made. "Effective immediately. You are no longer the manager of this store. Pack your personal belongings. My head of HR will be in touch with you regarding the terms of your dismissal." There was no appeal, no room for argument. It was a swift, clean, and brutal execution. Julian simply nodded, his eyes welling up with tears of shame and regret. He couldn't even look at Maya. He just turned, a broken man, and began the slow, agonizing walk towards the back office to collect his things. His reign was over. With Julian's pathetic retreat, a profound and awkward silence descended upon the main floor of the store. He had been the primary target of Mr. Harrison's initial wrath, but the three architects of the day's humiliation knew their own judgment was yet to be rendered. Bryce, Evan, and Kevin stood rooted to the spot, feeling the full, undivided weight of Mr. Harrison's disapproving gaze upon them. They were men accustomed to commanding rooms, to being listened to having their opinions valued. Now, they were speechless, stripped of all their bravado, waiting to be sentenced by a man who held significant sway over their professional lives. Bryce, as the instigator, felt the heat of the spotlight most intensely. He finally found his voice, though it was thin and reedy, a pale imitation of his usual booming confidence. Mr. Harrison, he began, taking a hesitant step forward. We. There's no excuse. We were arrogant. And we were cruel. We are deeply, deeply sorry. He looked towards Maya, his eyes pleading for forgiveness. Ms. Vance, I am so ashamed of my behavior. What you did, it was incredible, and what we did was unforgivable. I understand if you won't accept my apology, but I offer it with the utmost sincerity. Evan and Kevin murmured their own hasty, mumbled apologies, their faces flushed with a mixture of shame and fear. They looked like they wanted nothing more than to be anywhere else on earth. Mr. Harrison listened to their apologies without a change in his stern expression. He let the silence hang for a long moment after they finished speaking, making them squirm under the weight of their own words. Apologies are easy, he said finally, his voice flat and unimpressed. Understanding is harder. He walked slowly towards them, and they instinctively shrank back. You men fancy yourselves innovators, disruptors, judges of talent. You look for the next big thing, the hidden genius who will change the world. And yet, when a true genius was standing right in front of you, stocking your shelves and scanning your purchases, you couldn't see her. You didn't see her brilliance. You didn't even see her humanity. You saw a uniform. You saw a job title. You saw a target for your own insecurities. He stopped directly in front of Bryce, his gaze unwavering. Your apology is noted, he said coolly, but forgiveness is not mine to give. The consequences for your actions today will not be a lecture from me. They will be the quiet knowledge, for the rest of your careers, that you were so blinded by your own arrogance that you failed the simplest test of all, the ability to recognize greatness when it's not wearing a designer suit. He then delivered a more tangible consequence. I also happen to sit on the advisory board for the Tech Forward Initiative, a fund which I believe your firm is currently courting for a significant partnership. Bryce's face went pale. I will, of course, be sharing this anecdote at our next board meeting. We have a strict no assholes policy, I'm sure you understand. The threat was veiled but devastatingly clear. Their professional reputation was about to take a massive hit, coming directly from one of the most respected figures in the industry. The comeuppance was complete, delivered not with shouting, but with the cold, precise dismantling of their professional and personal pride. Defeated, they could only nod in miserable acceptance. Mr. Harrison gave them a final, dismissive look. Now, he said, his voice dropping to an unmistakable command, get out of my store. The three men, once so full of swagger, practically scrambled over each other in their haste to obey, their faces burning with humiliation as they scurried out the door and into the anonymity of the street. The immediate aftermath of the investor's hasty departure was a study in contrasts. The oppressive tension that had filled the air evaporated instantly, replaced by a quiet, almost reverent calm. The store, which moments before had felt like a courtroom, now felt like a sanctuary. At the center of it all stood Maya, no longer a cashier but the reclaimed champion, her quiet dignity now shining with the brilliance of vindication. Liam, who had watched the entire confrontation with wide-eyed disbelief, let out a long, slow breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He felt an overwhelming urge to applaud, to cheer, but he restrained himself, sensing that the moment called for a more solemn respect. He looked at Maya, and their eyes met. He gave her a small, hesitant smile, and she returned it with a warmth that made him feel like he had been a part of her victory. It was a silent acknowledgement of his kindness, his unspoken support, and it meant the world to him. Mr. Harrison's demeanor softened the moment the door chimed shut behind the disgraced trio. The stern titan of industry vanished, and the warm, avuncular friend returned. He turned to Maya, a gentle, almost paternal look in his eyes. I am so sorry, Maya, he said, his voice filled with genuine regret. I am so sorry you had to endure that. When you told me you wanted to work here to find some peace and quiet for your book, this is the last thing I ever imagined would happen. I've failed to protect you in my own store. Maya shook her head, a gesture of dismissal for his apology. You have nothing to be sorry for, Arthur, she said, her voice soft. In a way, this was useful. My book is about focus, but it's also about perception, about how the world judges a book by its cover, or a person by their uniform. Today was an extreme but powerful illustration of that very theme. She glanced down at the solved cube, still sitting perfectly on the counter, and, she added with a slight smile, it has been a while since I've had to perform under pressure. It's good to know I haven't lost my touch. Mr. Harrison chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. Lost your touch? My dear, I think you may have just set a new unofficial record right here on this countertop. He then turned his attention to Liam, who was still standing nearby, trying his best to look invisible. Mr. Harrison's eyes were kind, and he offered the young man a warm smile. And you, he said, his voice filled with approval. You are Liam, correct? Liam was startled to be addressed by the legendary owner. Yes, sir, Mr. Harrison, he stammered, his face flushing. I saw you, Mr. Harrison continued. I saw how you stood by her. You didn't run, you didn't join in, you stood your ground. That shows character. That is the kind of person I want working at Innovate Play. He clapped a hand on Liam's shoulder. With the unexpected management vacancy we now have, I'm going to need people with integrity to help rebuild the culture in this store. I think a promotion is in order. We'll start you as an assistant manager. Effective tomorrow. Liam's jaw dropped. He was completely stunned, unable to process the sudden, life-altering turn of events. He looked from Mr. Harrison to Maya, his eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. Sir, I thank you, he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. The consequences of the day had been delivered. For the arrogant, there was ruin. For the kind, there was reward. And for the champion, there was the quiet satisfaction of justice served. The transition in the weeks and months that followed was nothing short of transformative for the Innovate Play flagship store. The toxic, judgmental atmosphere that had festered under Julian's management was systematically dismantled and replaced with a culture of respect, curiosity, and genuine kindness. Harrison took a personal interest in overseeing the changes, and his first order of business was cementing Liam's role. The young man, true to the character Mr. Harrison had seen in him, rose to the occasion with surprising confidence and grace. Promoted to acting manager, Liam proved to be a natural leader. He treated every member of his staff as an equal, his decisions guided by a simple principle: create a place where everyone, from the wealthiest patron to the most curious child, felt welcomed and valued. He implemented new training programs focused not on upselling, but on engagement, teaching employees how to connect with customers, to understand their needs, and to share in the joy of discovery. The store's morale skyrocketed. Employees who had once dreaded coming to work now felt empowered and appreciated. The change was palpable to the customers as well. The stiff, museum-like silence was replaced by the happy chatter of families and the enthusiastic buzz of a staff that was genuinely passionate about the products they sold. Sales, far from dropping after the departure of Julian's so-called VIP clientele, began to climb steadily as a new, more diverse customer base discovered the welcoming environment. Maya, having finished the observational phase for her book, resigned from her position as cashier a week after the incident. But she did not disappear from the world of Innovate Play. Her connection to the store and to Liam remained strong. She became a frequent visitor, often stopping by just to chat with her former colleagues and see how things were progressing. She served as an informal mentor to Liam, offering him advice on leadership and management, drawn from her years of experience leading teams and navigating the high-pressure world of competitive sports. Her presence was a constant reminder of the store's new values, that true worth is not about appearances, but about substance and character. The story of what happened that day became a quiet legend among the staff, a foundational myth for the store's new identity. It was a story about the hidden genius in their midst, the arrogant manager who got his comeuppance, and the kind stock boy who became a leader. It served as a powerful lesson, repeated to every new hire, about the importance of looking beyond the surface and treating every individual with dignity. The store was no longer just a place to buy toys, it was a place that stood for something more. 6 months after that fateful Tuesday, Innovate Play hosted a special event. It was a charity mind challenge for kids from underserved communities, a day of puzzles, games, and workshops designed to inspire a love of learning and problem-solving. The event was the brainchild of Liam and Maya, and it was sponsored entirely by a new philanthropic fund set up by Mr. Harrison, named the Vance Initiative for Cognitive Excellence. The store was bustling with an energy it had never known before. Children of all ages and backgrounds filled the aisles, their faces alight with excitement as they tackled giant chessboards, intricate building challenges, and complex logic puzzles. At the center of the store, in the very spot where she had been humiliated, stood Maya. She was not dressed in her simple cashier's cardigan, but in the official jacket of a world champion, her 3 gold medals displayed proudly. She was surrounded by a throng of adoring children, patiently teaching them the basic algorithms to solve the first layer of a Rubik's Cube. Her quiet calm, once mistaken for simplicity, was now correctly identified as the profound focus of a master at her craft. Liam, looking every bit the confident and capable manager in a simple but smart polo shirt bearing the company logo, moved through the crowd, ensuring everything ran smoothly. He paused for a moment to watch Maya with the children, a proud smile on his face. He was no longer the timid, hesitant young man who was afraid to speak up. He was a leader who had helped build this beautiful, chaotic, joyful scene. From a distance near the entrance, Mr. Harrison watched the proceedings with a look of deep satisfaction. This was the true meaning of his brand, the embodiment of everything he had hoped to create. Not a sterile showroom for the wealthy, but a vibrant hub of learning and community. His gaze then drifted towards a quiet corner of the store. Near the stockroom entrance, a man was volunteering, quietly helping a young girl unpack a complex robotics kit. He was dressed in simple, nondescript clothing, and his demeanor was humble and focused. His name was Julian. After his dismissal, Julian had hit rock bottom. Stripped of his job, his status, and his pride, he was forced to confront the person he had become. The journey was painful, involving months of introspection and therapy. He had written a long, heartfelt letter of apology to Maya, not asking for forgiveness, but simply to acknowledge the profound wrong he had committed. To his surprise, she had responded, not with anger, but with a challenge. She challenged him to stop focusing on what he had lost and to start focusing on what he could give. She had connected him with a local youth center where he had started volunteering, teaching basic business and life skills. It was there he discovered a surprising, dormant talent for teaching, for connecting with young people who were struggling. He had learned the humility he so desperately lacked. He had asked Liam hesitantly if he could volunteer at the charity event, wanting to contribute to the positive change he had once stood in the way of. Liam, after consulting with Maya, had agreed. The circle was now complete. The antagonist had found not just punishment, but a path to redemption. A chance to rebuild his character from the ground up. As the charity event wound down, and happy children departed with their new puzzles and a renewed sense of their own potential, Maya, Liam, and Mr. Harrison stood together near the front of the store. The setting sun cast long shadows through the large windows, bathing the room in a warm, golden light. They looked at the joyful mess, the scattered game pieces and half-finished projects, and saw not chaos, but the beautiful evidence of a day well spent. A day that had been about building things up, instead of tearing people down. The story of that one afternoon had rippled outwards, creating waves of positive change that touched dozens, if not hundreds of lives. It had transformed a store, reshaped careers, and, most importantly, had become a powerful parable. It was a story about a woman who possessed a world-class talent but chose the quiet dignity of a simple life. It was a story about a man who judged her by her simple cardigan and lost everything, and another who saw her humanity and gained a future. It was a story about the arrogance of judging by appearances and the profound strength that lies in kindness and humility. The world is full of hidden geniuses. They are the quiet barista who is secretly a concert-level pianist, the janitor who writes breathtaking poetry in his spare time, the cashier who can solve a Rubik's Cube in under 5 seconds. Their talents are not always on display, not always dressed in the uniform of success that society expects. They walk among us, their greatness veiled by the simple cloaks of everyday jobs. How often do we look past them? How often do we make the same mistake as Julian and his arrogant friends, measuring a person's worth by their title or their attire, rather than the content of their character or the unique, brilliant spark they carry within them? The most valuable people are not always the ones who make the most noise or wear the most expensive clothes. They are often the ones who listen, who observe, who act with integrity when no one is watching. True strength is not found in condescension, but in compassion. True intelligence is not demonstrated by mocking others, but by the relentless curiosity to see the potential in everyone you meet. Before you dismiss someone based on a superficial judgment, remember Maya. Remember the quiet cashier in the gray cardigan. You never know when you might be standing in the presence of a champion. Look closer. Listen better. Treat everyone with the respect and kindness they deserve. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but because you might just be lucky enough to witness something truly extraordinary. What hidden talents do you possess? What greatness have you seen in others that the world has overlooked? Share your story, and let's continue to celebrate the quiet champions all around us. Remember to always look beyond the surface, for the world is far more interesting and full of wonder than our first glance might suggest.